Okay, everyone. A little bit of a change from the original plan. This video focuses on the final question in the Life of Pi extract, AQA English Language Paper 1 that we've been working through over the course of this week. Rather than doing the week 7 description, I thought we've done loads of descriptions. It would make actually more sense to do Paper 1 question 4 and really cover that and go through some of the expectations. I apologise if this is slightly echoey. Don't let anyone say that teaching isn't glamorous. I'm actually recording this in the catering, the cookery room in school. So it's a little bit echoey. There's a lot of metal tables and so on, but it's the only place I could find. So there we go. Right. Paper 1 question 4, the evaluation question. This is your task. So 20 marks. We're talking about 25 minutes in the exam. You've got to make sure you give yourself enough time to really do this question justice. It's going to direct you to a section of the source. The second part of the source, it says here from line 20 to the end. And of course, that means that we need to draw all of our quotations and material from line 20 to the end. Then it gives us a statement that we respond to. I'll go through all of this on the next couple of slides. And then the classic evaluation question that it poses: to what extent do you agree and or disagree with the statement? Now, some of the changes for 2026, that is, you will experience these changes. The bullet points are a little bit more helpful, particularly the second bullet point. So it says, consider your impressions of how the hyena behaves. So how does the hyena come across? Ultimately, we're thinking, is it funny or is it threatening? Does it seem like a serious threat to Pi? Or does it just actually seem quite comic and amusing? And then it says, crucially for the second one, comment on the methods. That is how the writer conveys whatever it is he is conveying about the hyena, whether the hyena is comic or whether the hyena is indeed a threat. And of course, support your response with references to the text, quotations. So here is the full task. I've underlined where it says methods the writer uses to present the hyena, because it's very, very easy to forget that. We need to make sure we are focusing in on those methods, that is addressing the how is the hyena presented, not just is it presented as funny and or threatening. So what is question 4 asking of us as students in the exam? Well, we need to make a judgment. So how far or to what extent are we agreeing or disagreeing with the statement? And as we will learn over the course of this video, we will agree in part with aspects of the statement, but there'll be also some key moments, really quite crucial moments, I would say, where we disagree with the statement. So we need to explain our impressions of the hyena's behavior, how we perceive the hyena. But we also need to comment analytically on the writer's methods. Now, we're not going to be able to analyze in extraordinary depth every single technique being used by the author, but we do need to engage in that analytical comment on writer's methods to support our judgment. So any comment we make analytically about the writer's methods is used to support our judgment on or our evaluation of the student statement. And of course, as always, we refer closely to the text with direct quotations. Here's the statement. The hyena could be seen as funny rather than threatening. The writer suggests a hyena is actually no serious threat to Pi. What's our job? How far do we agree? Okay, so you need to reread line 20 to the end, and you're thinking, right, funny or threatening? Or maybe both. Maybe there's also other aspects to how the hyena comes across by the end. So here's a summary of really the key moments and key things we want to be talking about. Here's what happens in lines 20 to the end. So we've got the hyena leaping out. Okay, that might seem threatening. But then whimpering and hesitating, far less threatening. Runs around the boat. The speed with which the hyena moves, you might find threatening, but also the way it's running around in circles seems kind of cartoonish, maybe therefore rather comic and amusing. The yipping noise, I don't think many people would find that frightening. It's not roaring or screaming or snarling, it's yipping. Again, comic, almost irritating actually, rather than frightening or producing a sense of threat. However, Pi does express terror, being seized by fear, so therefore threat, that supports that. The boat shaking, its sense of size, movement, the fact that it has the physical heft to shake the entire boat, and therefore the sense of threat that emerges from that. The hyena staring back at him, particularly the description of the eyes, we might perceive as threatening, and yet we get lots of moments of anticlimax. For every moment of threat that is set up, it is then anticlimactically undermined or kind of deflated by the author. Okay, so for nothing, it started running in circles again. We get that all morning repetition, just running in circles again, cartoonish rather than threatening, therefore comic or funny. The ending, lying in its own sick, vomiting, of course, coughing, it's kind of hacking cough, it groans. We might all see it more as an object of pity. We might feel a degree of sympathy rather than perceiving it as either funny or indeed a sense of threat. And these really are the only references that are going to be permitted in our answer. So, our structure, clear judgment, impression and reference, exploration of method, evaluation. We move on to a second impression and a third impression in this structure, and if we've got time, concluding with a single sentence. Overall, ultimately, in this way, I partially agree with, and then we obviously conclude, just wrap things up. Okay, so here's some core ideas and impressions that we can use. I'm not going to talk through these, I've already discussed them, but I've grouped them into kind of funny and ridiculous, and then threatening, but also rather limited. Okay, so lots of evidence that it's funny and ridiculous and silly and daft and cartoonish, and then also some evidence that it's threatening. But this sense of threat is always, as I've said there, limited or undermined by almost always being then followed by a sort of comedic moment. So, what do we not do? What we don't do is write something like this. Okay, this is going to be like absolute rock bottom low level answer. We want to think about why that is. I agree with the statement because the hyena runs around a lot and makes noises. Okay, already the language is very limited. It says yip, 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 which is funny. Why? Doesn't explain itself. So no explanation of effects. Also, it doesn't attack Pi, so it's not scary. There's no kind of development. It's making I suppose, a sort of general reference to the text, but it's not pinned down to a specific quotation. At the end, it is sick, which is not threatening. Again, why? This shows the hyena is not a real danger. So we've not really got any evaluation there. No real detailed explanation of effects. Very little engagement with methods specifically. It's extremely light on methods. If there is anything about methods, it's kind of implied rather than explicitly stated around methods. No sense of development of an overall judgment. Really repetitive. There are references, there is one quotation, but it doesn't really use them in a meaningful way. Yip, 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 which is funny, is not a really meaningful way of using a textual reference. And there's virtually no structural awareness either, other than at the end it is sick. Okay, that's kind of paraphrasing rather than structural awareness, we might say. Here is a strong example, and I need to briefly shrink the size of my head. So let's have a look at this one. Overall, I mostly agree with the statement because in this section of the extract, the hyena's behaviour becomes so repetitive and exaggerated that it feels increasingly absurd, daft, ridiculous, rather than genuinely dangerous. Although the sequence begins with a clear sense of threat, so this is a kind of like overview, this quickly dissolves, falls into comic repetition, and ultimately an anticlimactic conclusion in which the creature, this is when it's in its own vomit, appears pitiful rather than predatory. At first, so look at the way I'm really methodically tracking things through. My opening is my overall view on the statement. It's my overall evaluation and judgment of the validity of the statement. At first, there is a credible impression of danger. It does actually seem quite dangerous. Pi is seized by fear as the hyena races towards him. And look how I'm zooming in. The method, the verb, seized, conveying an abrupt loss of control and an overpowering emotional response. The dynamic suddenness of leapt, okay, I've zoomed into another word, reinforces the animal's unsettling unpredictability, momentarily priming the reader for an imminent attack and suggesting a rapidity of movement that makes a hyena seem genuinely threatening. Notice how I'm constantly going back to the language of the statement. Genuinely threatening, comic, funny, okay? However, this tension is steadily undermined by the circular movement that follows, described through the escalating list, 1 lap, 2, 3, 4, 5, and onwards. The cumulative or kind of building up rhythm of this sequence renders the hyena mindless and almost cartoonishly, like ridiculously, comically, in a funny way, sort of frantic movement. It feels like a cartoon being described. This impression is further heightened by the repeated sound pattern. We've got the yipping, which is high-pitched and irritating rather than intimidating, encouraging the reader to view the creature as a nuisance rather than a potential killer. Even the moment where the hyena fixes its bright and black eyes on Pi ends in an anticlimax, signalled by the curt, meaning very short, sentence, "for nothing," which punctures any lingering sense of threat. For every potential flash of danger, the writer offers an equally comic or ridiculous behaviour, continually wearing away or eroding the tension and largely validating, that is, reinforcing or supporting, the statement's claim, that is, that the creature is comic rather than threatening. It's funny rather than threatening. So why is this so strong? Well, what we've got is a really clear and nuanced judgment. It shows how far we agree. It's not just a simple yes or no. It's what we need to be doing. Why is this a detailed understanding of the extract? Because it tracks the whole sequence, the leaping to the circling, yip, yip, yipping, and then the anticlimax. Techniques are linked to effects, seized, 1 lap, 2, 3, for nothing. We've got really, really precise academic vocabulary, anticlimax, cumulative, or that build-up of rhythm, unpredictability, the idea of tension being undermined or punctured. And there's also a logical, cohesive argument. There is threat, but then there's absurdity, then there's comedy, then there's pity. We've got that clear sense of progression over the course of the response. And then finally, that focus on reader impact. It consistently explains how the writer shapes our response. This is what we need to be doing in our response. So I'm going to keep this video really short. You've got a great example to follow, and you've also got an absolutely appallingly terrible non-example to avoid. You want yours to look like my great example, and obviously not like the terrible example that preceded it. Okay? So for homework, rather than the week 7 description, what I want you to do is focus on that question 4, and you can practice that because it's a really, really key question. 20 marks out of the 40 that make up the first section of the paper, section A. So 50%, half the marks that you can get in the first opening hour of the exam are on one question. We've got to give ourselves a full 25 minutes for question 4, and we want it to look exactly like this, and certainly not like this. Okay, so there we go. Hopefully a short but useful video as you prepare and you revise for next Tuesday's mock exam. And if I don't see you before next Tuesday, the very best of luck.